This is Jonathan Yates with College AD. Welcome to Georgia Tech for an interview with Todd Stansbury, the athletic director, or as we call it in the industry, in the big chair. Mr. Stansbury, thank you for taking the time to be with us today.
Appreciate the opportunity.
Well, yesterday was signing day, and by all reports, Georgia Tech did very well. Looking at the people signing, there seems to be a definite type athlete that comes to Georgia Tech. Having played football here, is that true?
Well, I think just because of the nature of the institute, you're going to attract a certain kind of athlete. The academic rigor that's required, and so I would say when you do look at our rosters and those student athletes that we recruit, they probably do look a little bit different than a lot of other schools.
I think very different. I counted 12 who were just pure academic studs, either National Honor Society or wanted to be engineering. What happens when they get to this campus and face those challenges?
I think, well, they're the ones that not only we have to attract, but they embrace it. I mean, they come here for that reason, and I think that's the thing that I guess that's the thing that I kind of preach is that there are those student athletes out there that want to compete not only at the highest level in their sport, but also at the highest level academically, and I think that's what we have to offer.
Now on the football roster, I counted over 40 players who were majoring in engineering, pre-med, physics, or computer sciences, and I'm going to give a shout out to Jake Stickler and Presley Harvin, because Jake plays 7 instruments and Presley plays the number 2, so you got to bring that out. So apparently it's working here when they get here.
Yeah, and I mean it's an impressive group of young men and women that we have here, and so one of our biggest challenges is to make sure that we're pushing them really to be the best that they can be, because in a lot of places you just assume the smart kids are going to figure it out on their own. Here we don't assume that, and so we push them outside their comfort zones, and really are working to show them that they have potential they don't even know that they have.
Now, what has happened over the past decade? In 2007, the graduation success rate for football was 51% here. Last year was 82%. Clearly, whatever you're doing is working.
Well, I think a lot of that is Paul Johnson. It's important to him that his players graduate, and you can put all the best programs and support programs around your student athletes, but if your coaches don't buy in, you're not going to see the kind of success that we have, and we're extremely fortunate that we've got a head coach that it's important, and he he pushes it not just in recruiting when mom's around, but when the players actually are here as well.
It's not just Coach Johnson for football. It seems to be every coach. Your cross-country runner, Solomon, he won ACC Scholar Athlete for his thing. Every one of your teams is at the top in the NCAA for graduation success rate, and close to 40% of your players were all academic ACC in every sport, not just football.
Yeah, and I think it's cultural. At Georgia Tech, we think that is central to our brand, is that we're developing the young people that will change the world, and therefore I think that is, that's the expectation. In football, a lot of times we say, during the week we want to look like Harvard, and on Saturday we want to play like Alabama, and I think we do a pretty good job of pushing our student athletes in every aspect of their lives, and ultimately that's why one of the things that we talk about is that graduation is actually the beginning of the road, not the end of the road, and what sets us apart in a lot of ways is what are our student athletes doing 5 and 10 years after graduation.
Now, you had an interesting tweet about that on January 3rd when Calvin Johnson wrote his article for the Players Tribune saying he was retired and not coming back, that after putting away Dancing with the Stars and getting married, he wanted to come back to Georgia Tech and finish his degree. And you said this is another example of a Georgia Tech athlete writing their own ticket, because that's the type of players we produce.
Yeah, and I look at, there's a reason Calvin Johnson can retire on his own terms. It's because he's got something else that he wants to do. Mark Teixeira in baseball. This is his first year out, and he's developing 300 acres, 2 or 3 miles from campus here in West Midtown. And I had the fortunate fly-on-the-wall experience. I had dinner with Mark Teixeira and Charlie Blackman on Monday, and to hear those guys talk, and something I didn't know about Charlie was that 3 years into his major league career, while he was injured, he actually came back to campus and graduated. And he jokes that he was probably the highest paid student in America that year. But I think it says a lot that somebody like a Charlie Blackman thinks that graduating from Georgia Tech is that important, that he comes back and it's not online and he's sitting in the classroom with other students. And I think that's just the kind of culture that we have here.
Now, what also impressed me in terms of your culture was you have players who are playing after they've already graduated, working on their master's degrees, which is very impressive.
Yeah, I think, and they're working on their masters, and then the other thing I think that is a little bit unique to us is that we had close to 90 of our student athletes last year, all sports represented, that did full-on summer internships, and that's something that to have that many students doing internships during the summer while they still have eligibility, yes, which means they're still in training and doing all the things that they have to do to prepare for their season. And these internships are, with all the big brands, Coca-Cola, KPMG, and CBRE. We had one student did her internship with NASA, Accenture. So these aren't just, washing cars at the local car dealership. These are real deal internships.
Speaking of the culture and not washing cars at the local thing, you also tweeted about Project Lammer.
Yeah.
We'd love to hear about that. That's the entrepreneurial spirit of Georgia Tech combined with the engineering and high-tech focus.
Yeah, and I think, and Ben is a prime example of a student athlete that...
Great basketball player.
Great basketball player that wanted to come to Georgia Tech because of its mechanical engineering program. And what we're doing with him, both trying to what the coaches are doing with him is one thing, but using science and technology to make him a better athlete. And then there are a number of things we're doing with our faculty in biomechanics and that sort of thing. And then we also have another faculty member that's working with him on hydration because, he's a big man playing 38 minutes a game, and he's chronically dehydrated. But rather than kind of just do it the old-fashioned way and tell him to drink more fluids, we're using the expertise on our campus to find a better way to keep him hydrated.
Now, what brought you to Georgia Tech? You played ball here. You worked your way up in college, sports administration. That's not a Georgia accent you have.
No, I'm actually from Toronto, Canada. And long story short, I was on a family vacation when I was about 10 years old in Daytona Beach, and we just happened to be staying at the same hotel as members of the Georgia Tech football team. And
what would happen if they were members of the University of Georgia football team?
Well, God forbid that never happened. I thank God every day, actually, that they were from Georgia Tech. But I said, I know what, I want to grow up just to be like those guys, and things kind of fell into place, and I had the opportunity to come to Georgia Tech.
Now, when you were playing at Georgia as a middle linebacker, that was sort of the golden era of linebackers when you look at it. You had Lawrence Taylor playing at University of North Carolina. Certainly don't have to explain who he was. You had Pat Swilling, All-American at Georgia Tech, went on to play for the Dome Patrol in the NFL, All Patrol. Otis Wilson, Louisville. Otis, Wilbur Marshall down at Florida. What was it like playing middle linebacker during that era?
Well, fortunately or unfortunately, I played the same position as Pat Swilling, which means I was more of a special teams player. But
you pushed him to greatness. Yeah, you inspired him.
Yeah, me and a lot of others. But I running out behind the Ramblin' Wreck on a Saturday afternoon in Atlanta, Georgia is pretty special.
And what was it like having Bill Curry as a coach? He was a hard-nosed center, What, college, NFL?
That's another where you make decisions to come to college or which college you choose for maybe not all the right reasons all the time, but I am incredibly fortunate and thank God every day that Bill Curry was my coach. A man of character, really an icon in intercollegiate athletics for all the right things. And to have him as my mentor, my coach, and now my friend and counselor, I feel very, very fortunate.
Now, speaking of icons, you had the good fortune of working under the legendary Homer Rice at Georgia Tech. What was that like? I
mean, you just think two men that have had an incredible influence on my life, Bill Curry and Homer Rice. I came to Georgia Tech because of these wild and crazy guys at the Hawaiian Inn in Daytona Beach. And
you were a pretty precocious 10-year-old.
And I was fortunate enough to have two legends, two icons. Of course, Dr. Homer Rice, in my mind, invented student-athlete welfare.
Yes.
We were doing it here at Georgia Tech. When I got here in 1980, I was in the first class of his total person program. And I have essentially spent my whole career using that as the base of what I believe intercollegiate athletics should be, is where we train young men and young women to go out and lead. And I've taken what I learned here as a student athlete and have basically been evolving it for the last 20-something years, and fortunate enough to bring it home and really just build off of Dr. Homer Rice's legacy.
Did that program inspire your Everyday Champion program here at Georgia Tech?
It essentially is the Everyday Champions program.
And how is that working out here at the Rambling Wreck?
It's great because the DNA was already here. And so taking what I have done at other universities, at Oregon State and UCF, and really bringing it home has been I think it's not only been an easy transition, but because it's part of the Georgia Tech DNA, I think we've been able to accelerate some of the things that we've been able to do. And while we're just getting started, I'm pretty excited about what we're going to be able to do here.
Being inspired by the Georgia Tech football players at Daytona Beach, how were you able to sell that to your parents?
Well, they were there too. So I don't know what that says about them. I think, though, they were, while those guys were having a very, very good time, at the same time, you had these 19, 20, 21-year-old kids on spring break that took the time to make a 12-year-old feel pretty special. And I think in that showed my parents a lot about them, obviously, but what Georgia Tech the type of young men that Georgia Tech produces.
And you've never looked back. What inspired you to go into college sports administration?
It's crazy turn of events. The kind of the ringleader of that group in Daytona Beach ultimately came back to Georgia Tech as head of academic support for student athletes. So essentially became my academic advisor. And when he decided to move on to his law career, he asked me if I'd like to take over for him, and at the time I was a banker. And
it's not a tough choice.
And I thought, no, that sounds a lot more fun than what I'm doing. And so, ironically, that kid I met on a beach in Florida has been pretty instrumental in the whole trajectory of my life.
I was telling you about my cousin out in the waiting room. He's a fighter pilot, did his survival training in Eastern Washington. Jay said that the best thing about being in the Air Force is that whenever they built a new base, they put in the golf course first and then the runways next. What's the best thing about being an athletic director?
The best thing about being an athletic director is, and I think being in intercollegiate athletics in general, is you take these young kids as 17 and 18-year-olds that have no clue. and you have the opportunity to not only influence them, push them, help them find out who they are, help them realize what their purpose in life, what their passions are, and in a lot of cases find out that they have potential that they don't even know that they have. And you see them, I think, grow into young men and women that ultimately go on and not only are successful, but in a place like, coming from a place like Georgia Tech, they're going on and they're going to change this world.
You know, speaking of no clue, I was at the night intercollegiate event in D.C. in October, and Mark Emmert, the head of the NCAA, he spoke of a study they did that showed that 76% of D1 basketball players, 50% of D2, and 24% of D3 players thought they were going to play in the NBA, when in reality, less than 1% are going to make it. When do you see that light bulb go off in a Georgia Tech athlete when they realize, hey, you know what? I'm not going to be the next Mark Teixeira. I'm not going to be the next Chris Bosh. I'm not going to be the Pat Swilling. I'm in one of the greatest schools and one of the greatest cities in the world. It's time for me to focus.
You know, I think in a lot of cases, it doesn't go off until really, really late and becomes very, very apparent. And so I think, you know, one of the things, and we even changed the way that we talk about the opportunity at Georgia Tech and academics and professional development, from a professional development standpoint, that this is not an or. This is not a fallback if you don't make it. This is an and. And in fact, if you do make it, you need it even more because, you know, when I graduated from here and I went to work for C&S Bank, I went through a training program and they taught me everything I needed to know about being a banker. You get drafted into any of the professional leagues, there's no training program. You're in charge of your own brand, you're in charge of your own board of directors, you're in charge of your own career, you're essentially an entrepreneur. And so what we are in the process of implementing into our Total Person program is the whole idea of we're making you pro-ready. And you even need to be more pro-ready if you're a professional athlete because there is no training program. And you need to know all the things that those of us that aren't good enough need to know to go and be bankers and lawyers and law school and medical school and, you know, wherever else we may go. So what we try to do is show them the relevance of what we're trying to teach them, regardless of whether they make pro or not.
Now, 2 initiatives you started will help those who don't make pro and aren't Chris Bosh or Teixeira. One was a focus on branding, which I find very interesting because the University of Wyoming, Tom Berman, great AD out there, he commissioned a study that found that the football team generated $46 million worth of branding for its players and earned media. Laramie, Wyoming does not make it on the top 200 media markets. Atlanta, Georgia, as if I have to tell you, is huge. Why the focus on branding? You were a middle linebacker. That's not the type of guy you think would care about, you know.
Well, I think that you look at the brand, the great brands, and from a you know from a corporate level, and you see the aspects of what makes a great brand, and all you got to do is you see that logo, and you have you think a certain way about whether it's a product, whether it's an organization or whatever. So when I got back, it really focused on, you know, what does the Georgia Tech brand stand for? Who are we? What are we? What, you know, somebody that's never ever been on campus or maybe never even been to Atlanta, when they see that GT, what does it mean to them? And then it goes down from there where every one of us have a brand, and protecting that brand. And obviously, you know, I think when you look at guys like Calvin Johnson and Mark Teixeira and others, Matt Kuchar, what a great brand.
Do the student athletes appreciate that?
I think they appreciate it, and also rather than telling your student athletes all the time all the stuff they shouldn't do, I think you're much more effective if the message is what you need to do to bring value, both to yourself as a future professional in whatever the field may be, and how your personal brand is a major part of that. And then the thing about being a student athlete at Georgia Tech, there's a lot of value in that brand, because in a lot of cases, people may not know you or know of you, but you're coming to them, whether it's through a resume or a reference or a recommendation or whatever, and the first thing anybody says about anybody that's been a student athlete is so-and-so played linebacker
Yes.
at Georgia Tech. Now, I haven't buckled a chin strap in 35 years, yet I'm still introduced to this day as a Georgia Tech football player. And that is, so when these young people on signing day make the decisions they do to go whatever school they go to, initially they're not thinking about the fact that that's going to be part of their brand for really the rest of their lives. And the Georgia Tech brand is pretty powerful.
You know, when you look at the terms of branding, when the cities in America that are booming, they're southern cities like Raleigh, Nashville, Atlanta, and what do they all have in common? They've got great universities. In Raleigh, you've got Duke. Nashville, you've got Vanderbilt. And here in Atlanta, you have Georgia Tech, which is obviously why it's in the top 20 for Amazon's choice of their second headquarters. Now, what's really interesting, I read an article this week where college students think Amazon should locate the second headquarters in Atlanta. That's their number one choice. So Georgia Tech is having a huge impact on branding the city there.
Yeah, and when you look at what's going on around this campus and in Tech Square, which is part of our innovation corridor, and the fact that Georgia Tech is kind of at the center of innovation and entrepreneurship in this city, it's a pretty exciting time to be here.
And do you think this effort has more student athletes interested in college sports administration? The Walter Campbell Trophy winner this year, Micah Kaiser from UVA, he said he wanted to be an athletic director. Here's a guy who's Rhodes Scholar material, and he wants to become an athletic director. Do you have many students come up to you weekly and ask you, how do I become an athletic director? How do I follow you into the big chair?
I don't know if it's weekly, but definitely a lot of student athletes are looking at athletic administration as a potential career, and I think it's a lot different now than, say, when I started. And as a student athlete, the only thing I knew about athletic administration was really my coaches. And
Sure.
if you didn't want to coach, then you went and you became a banker, which is what I did. And I think these kids are much more sophisticated now about the business behind sport in general, whether it's intercollegiate or pro or whatever. So we do have a lot of students, a lot of student athletes, and a lot of students that I'll get emails all the time of wanting to get together and just learn more about how to do this and how to ultimately become an athletic director.
Do you see more and more female student athletes wanting to work in the big chair one day?
Most definitely. I think one of the great things about intercollegiate athletics is that we are producing some of the most incredible female leaders,
Yes.
and they are fearless.
Looking at your trophy cases, I would say female champions more so than leaders.
Yeah, and it's exciting to see.
Now, when I was at the University of Wyoming interviewing Tom Berman, I was talking to one of their female golfers, and I asked her what her handicap was, and she was a scratch handicap, no surprise there. And I said, what about your father? She said the old man played to a 13 or 14. I said, well, when you play him, do you let him key off from the short tees and you from the back tees? And she gave me this look, and she said, no, I may let him take the occasional mulligan, but that's not going to happen. Do you see that same fierce level of competition here with your female student athletes?
Most definitely. They play to win, and they're competing at the highest level, obviously, at the ACC, but the other part of it is every time they walk up that hill, they're competing in in these classrooms with just these phenomenal students.
So you see that same competition and drive carrying over to the classroom too.
Yeah, and you know, and I think that's one of the, you know, we talk about what are our student athletes doing 5 and 10 years after graduations, because they go on to be so incredibly successful. And I really think that the process of being here for 4 years and constantly competing in the classroom and on the fields of play just create a what we call market-ready graduate that's ready to compete. That's all they know. And when you talk to business leaders and what they're looking for, the ability to communicate and ability to work in teams, ability to work in diverse work environments, you know, think on your feet, creative, hard workers, self-motivated. Those are all, in my mind, attributes that we think of when we think of student athletes.
Now, in terms of student athletes, one thing I was very impressed is how Georgia Tech will go after its former players who have left school but not graduated and work with them to come back and work with them financially where the pro leagues or the NCAA weren't. And they say when they come back that they bring that same level of competition from playing fields in the pros to the classrooms here at Atlanta with Georgia Tech.
Yeah, and you have to, because it is so incredibly competitive. But Georgia Tech has been going after their former student athletes to come back to graduate since Bobby Dodd.
Yeah, and that's a great program.
So it's kind of like, this is not something new for us. When I was head of academics, we would probably, in an average year, I'd probably have, you know, 10 or 12 former student athletes that were back in school. Mm-hmm. Some of them pros, some of them had gone pro and were out of the leagues or whatever. But that is, that's something that Georgia Tech's been committed to for a long, long time.
And something else that I admire in what I think is your brand is you're caring about the athletes. When the NCAA ruled in 2014 that you could let your athletes have more access to meals, you guys set up a fueling station immediately. How successful has that been with the athletes?
It's been great, and of course we and we started a nutrition center immediately, and we've just upgraded that in the last 3 or 4 months. So, the other part that I think about what we have to do here at Georgia Tech is, because Georgia Tech is not for everybody, we really have to build and develop our student athletes. Not all of them are going to come here ready-made. And so nutrition and sport performance and biomechanics and technology and all those things we have got to use to our advantage. And so treating our student athletes right and putting them in the position to be successful, whether it's in the classroom or on the field, as well as giving them the soft skills that they're going to need, that they learn in the Total Person program, is all part of what we've been doing for a long, long time. And and we were doing it when it wasn't fashionable. I mean, when Homer Rice said this was a priority in 1980, not everybody was really concerned about student athlete welfare, or whether they were graduating, or whether they were learning about financial planning and nutrition and all the things that I had to sit in a classroom to learn while I was here. And at the time I was probably like, why am I doing this? Why am I sitting in this classroom and maybe not getting some sleep, because we were doing it during two-a-days. And Coach Curry was teaching a lot of it.
Yes.
I guarantee you that wasn't going on at many other places across the country, and now that's more and more the norm.
Now, when you mentioned biomechanics, when I interviewed Heather Lake, the athletic director at Pitt, she said that they had gotten a special study because of their fantastic medical school and healthcare facilities. So does Georgia Tech get preference for that too, because of its excellent engineering reputation?
Yeah, we do. And in fact, I've created a position on our staff, Assistant Athletic Director for Innovation, because we have so much going on this campus that I needed somebody that was dedicated to identifying opportunities for us to either partner with faculty members based on the research that they're doing, or what may be going on in the startup space in Tech Square that we could potentially either be a test kitchen for, or partner in helping some sport-related technologies come to fruition. So that's and we have the #1 bioengineering school in the country. So we talk about the excellence associated with Georgia Tech athletics, but the excellence on this campus is remarkable, and what these faculty members are doing in their labs are things that I want to make sure that we're aware of, so that we can take advantage of that too. And that's kind of the Project Lammers
Sure.
piece is part of that, where we've been able to merge what's happening in labs on campus with how do we actually make one of our student athletes better.
Well, when you look at the football player bios, there was one who wanted to make mechanical limbs. There was another one who wanted to go in robotics. There was another one who wanted to go into automotive engineering through his mechanical engineering degree. So are they buying into the innovation focus?
Most definitely. In fact, I had we had a board meeting this morning, and one of our speakers was the dean of our engineering college, who was talking about the collaboration between athletics and what's going on on campus, specifically in College of Engineering. So, not many, and him coming to me, speak to my board is just basically he's returning the favor, because I went and spoke to his board about a month or so ago about the same thing, and I don't know that there's a lot of athletic directors speaking to the board of a College of Engineering about innovation.
Well, I guess with Calvin Johnson as Megatron, that helps you sell the innovation and the engineering a lot more.
Well, he definitely doesn't hurt, and what a remarkable young man he is.
Oh, he's got an incredible background.
And of course his parents are phenomenal. And
Let's look at your background. You were the AD at Oregon State University, who was ranked #2 in baseball. They are a perennial powerhouse. How did you create a baseball program in the Pacific Northwest when all the other top 20 teams are Florida, Arizona, South Carolina?
Pat Casey. He is in my mind, the model of the influence that a head coach can have on creating a championship program from scratch. Of course, he has none of the advantages,
No.
especially weather.
No.
But he had a blueprint in his mind of how to do it, and having the opportunity to work with him for almost a decade, it taught me a lot about the influence that a coach can have, and how important it is for you to know who you are as an institution, as in the case of Oregon State. What is it that you're selling? How are you attracting student athletes? What kind of student athlete is going to fit at your place? Is going to and he was he's a pretty special coach, and I credit the building of that program to him.
So as an athletic director, you were able to learn from one of your coaches?
I'm always learning from my coaches. In fact, I make it up. I meet with every single head coach once a month.
What do you look for in hiring?
Knowing who you are, understanding that every institution is unique. So how are you going to be? Every coach that you potentially would hire have been successful, because you don't interview anybody that hasn't figured out how to win. But can they translate the success of where they are to your place?
What do you look for in passion? Winning's easy. That's quantifiable. They've got that one loss record. How do you look for that passion for the players, for the total development of the student athlete that's so important here at Georgia Tech?
Why do you do this? Why do you want to coach? I had the opportunity when I was at UCF to hire Tiffany Roberts, who played on the '96 U.S. soccer team and the '99 World Cup team. And I asked her that question. And she had all the credentials. You know, she was on the national team for 16 years from the time she was 16, at a time that in my mind really elevated women's sports in the United States. And her team, I think, and what they did in '96 really set the tone. And I asked her, why do you coach? And she said, you know, sport, and specifically soccer, has given me an incredible life and so many opportunities, and I believe it's my responsibility to pass on those same lessons and those same opportunities to young women.
So speaking of passion, you know, how do you sell Atlanta and Georgia Tech to Amazon? What do you say to them, to Jeff Bezos, to say, this is why you should locate your second headquarters here?
This is a young, dynamic, can-do city. You know, that it's a great place to live. It's a great place to learn. It's where, because of Georgia Tech in my mind, it's a place you go to solve problems. You know, when I think of Georgia Tech, I think of the Apollo 13 movie. When they're trying to figure out how to get those guys home, and there's a place it's either in Houston where a guy comes in with a cardboard box and dumps a bunch of junk on the table, and it's duct tape and things that they could find in the capsule to fix whatever the problem was. And I remember thinking when I saw that, I goes, that's Georgia Tech.
So you think if he came to a Georgia Tech football game, that would clinch the deal?
I think he would definitely be intrigued by, and obviously the pomp and circumstance of football Saturday. I think he would love it, but in addition to that, I'd like to put him in a room with a bunch of our student athletes and just have a conversation. That's what would blow him away.
Now, if he can't make it, can College AD get that media pass for the game?
Sure.
I look forward to it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
It's Jonathan Yates with College AD. Stay classy, Ramblin' Rec Nation. Thank you.